Hi and welcome back to my channel. I've been away for a couple of months and I felt it was about time to come back, or I was a bit bored, so here I am, and now in a new configuration. So I've moved my desk and my lights and my camera, but I understand now why I haven't done it before, because it's kind of a hassle. But we'll see with the results this time. I was going to talk about me being on a break in a live stream, but I'm a bit under the weather and I didn't know if my voice was going to keep up, so I'm recording this video instead. But I will try to get to a live stream in the near future and talk about me being on a break and also what books I have acquired the last half year, because there are some books. Since last time I saw you, I have read quite a few books, so I will try to get through them quite quickly so we don't end up making this a 24-hour video. So just leave a comment if you're wondering about something, if there's something you feel like I left out. So let's get to it. The first book is sort of a Norwegian modern classic, and it's Mengelesu by Gert Nygaardshaug. This one is a part of a series of I don't know how many books, but I've been thinking about reading this for quite some time. And the funny thing, and the thing I knew was going to happen, is that when I was on my break from YouTube, I knew that I was going to write less notes because I didn't know if I was going to talk to anyone about them. So I did. And I don't know if that's a wise thing or not, but at least what you now get to hear is my thoughts 2 months after I finished reading this, and there isn't that much that stays with me. I don't think that's a very good thing for this book. But anyway, it's about this kid called Mino. He grows up in a little village in South America somewhere, and then soldiers from other places come in and ruin smaller towns. That's sort of the theme. And then Mino and his friends seek to revenge this. So that's basically the plot. I've seen many describe this as an eco-thriller, focusing on the environment, species and all that, at the same time as they're hunting bad guys. So this should have been really thrilling, but I felt like at times it was too in the details. It's also got that magical realism to it, which I usually despise. Also did in this one. Also, there was a lot of name dropping, and that confuses me sometimes. All in all, I felt like this was a bit uneven, should have been more exciting than it was. And at times where they tried making it exciting, they also just made it too much, so I couldn't take it seriously. So I ended up thinking it was okay, but nothing more than that. My next read was recommended to me by Silje, a fellow Norwegian booktuber, and that is A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. And believe it or not, I read that on my Kindle. So I decided late this summer that I would try reading more books on my Kindle if I found them for cheap. I still can't wrap my head around paying a lot of money for an ebook. At least not more than I would have paid for my paperbacks, and so I now try and find all the cheap Kindle books available. But anyway, this is about the author himself trying to walk the Appalachian Trails in the US. He hasn't done a lot of walking, I guess, but now he sets out on this adventure. And by luck, he also gets a friend with him on his trips. And this friend is quite hopeless. I feel like this is a mix between a memoir, educational, inspirational novel. It's about them hiking, but also about all the places they see and the history behind it, at the same time as they want us to learn from their mistakes. And there are a lot of them. This was a really funny read. I did enjoy it a lot, and I felt like the historical facts things were really fascinating. And I haven't read any other books from this author, but I guess that's what he tries to do with all the things he writes about. At least that's what I've heard, and I'm definitely going to read a lot more from him in the future, as long as they're on a deal on Kindle. I guess I'm hoping that I'll find some of them thrifting later this year. The next read I did was one that I've made a separate review of, and that is War Diaries by Astrid Lindgren. So this is about Astrid Lindgren and Second World War and her thoughts around it. And she had a special role during the Second World War, reading stuff that went in and out of Sweden. So Sweden was a neutral country, and it was a really fascinating book. I would recommend you to check out my review of it if you're interested. I did thoroughly enjoy it, and that's mostly because I knew what was going to come after this. So she went through whole of Second World War, and at the end we got all of these amazing characters and her stories. So that makes me really sentimental, I guess. Then something really important happened. I decided to just read all the books I wanted to read. For those of you that have been following this channel for a while, you know that I only like to read books that I have as a physical copy in my shelf. But I can promise you one thing, and that is that these couple of months have been the first period of my life where that hasn't mattered at all, because what I'm going to talk about now are books that I don't have anywhere, and it was difficult in the beginning, but I have persevered. This of course meant that I could read whatever I felt like in sort of a spur of the moment approach, and I think that was really valuable. So the first ones of these books that I read was Me by Elton John, and I truly loved that book. So I have really enjoyed the memoir style books, and especially about musicians, because I'm also very much a fan of music. I listened to this on audiobook where Elton John has the introduction, and then Taron Egerton, who plays Elton John in the movie Elton John, has like the bulk of the rest, and then Elton John comes in towards the end. And that to me was beautiful in itself. I have noticed those two having somewhat of a bromance between them, and they seem like good friends, which I don't know. I don't know why I really just love their relationship, but that's something I do, and in itself, that made the audiobook better. I think I just had a completely different idea of how Elton John grew up than he actually did. Without me ever having known anything about him, I sort of just guessed that he was bullied a lot for being himself and then like becoming this huge superstar. But he starts out this book by telling us that he wasn't really bullied. He didn't have like a troubled childhood, even though in many ways he did. He doesn't talk that much about it, I guess, or I didn't feel that that was what he was saying at least. And what I found to be one of my favorite things about this is how much he doesn't sugarcoat things. He has been an asshole at times, and he talks about it. There's nothing in between there. It's just him being honest about his life, I guess. Or that's how it feels like. You can never tell. But at the end, you're sitting there thinking that this is a fantastic person. And he's been through a lot. I don't know, I just love that book. And at some point I will probably listen to that audiobook again. Since I'd already started my journey of reading books I don't currently own, I thought that would be a good thing to keep on going. So my next read was a book by Lucinda Williams about herself. Don't tell anybody the secrets I told you. She's one of my favorite artists, and I've been listening to her for nearly all my life, it seems now, and I was intrigued. This kept showing up on my Kindle page on Amazon, so I thought it was meant to be. Contrary to Elton John, she got her fame and fortune very late in her life, so she's only 6 years younger than Elton John, but her hit record sort of came about over 20 years after his. So they're kind of different in that way. And the interesting thing is how she talks about like being a regular musician, not being a superstar. And this goes on for the biggest part or the biggest chunk of this book. Also, she incorporates a lot of her lyrics into this. Like, so there could be a chapter and then lyrics at the end, and she could talk about the lyrics and where they came from. This is definitely the most interesting part to me. Also, which people she meets and is influenced by is interesting. I wouldn't say that this memoir is especially well written or especially interesting, but I did enjoy it just because I love Lucinda Williams' music, so I think that's my conclusion on that one. And naturally, after finishing that one, I picked up Girl in a Band by Kim Gordon. So she's the bassist for Sonic Youth, or was, and a lot of my friends has this standing in their shelves, but none of my friends have read it, I think. It doesn't seem like it. It also seemed like a very popular book among music lovers. Sonic Youth has never been one of my favorite bands, so it wasn't the same relatable thing that I had with the two other ones. At times I felt like this one was kinda too personal. Not that the other two books hadn't been personal, it was just something about the things she talked about that didn't feel like it didn't feel like it was all relevant sometimes. But that could have been my mood as well. The thing I liked most about this one is how she describes New York in the 80s. So I've read Patti Smith's Just Kids, and that's also largely based in New York in the 60s and 70s, and I absolutely love that book. So this is the 80s, and it's interesting to see how she describes that city. So I felt like I was on a journey, or a parallel journey, between those two books when I read this one. All in all, I felt like this was an okay read. Hearing about artists of that time being described by another musician is, as always, fascinating, but it also makes me doubt how much of it is true, but I'll never know. In Norwegian, we have this expression called blood on tooth. I don't know if that translates, but it's sort of, if an animal gets blood on his teeth, he gets a lot more hungry and continues. So with that in mind, my next read is also a musical memoir, and it's by Jeff Tweedy, and I have to check my notes. It's called Let's Go So We Can Get Back. Jeff Tweedy is the vocalist of the band Wilco, and I truly love that band. It's one of my favorite live bands. Earlier he was a part of another band with this other guy. They split up because it didn't seem they like each other that well, so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to read this one. I was interested because I loved the band that they had before as well, so I was kind of sad that that didn't work out, but then we got Wilco, so that's also something. I think what separates this one from the other music memoirs is that he tries to go into this with a lot of humor, so he has a lot of jokes about his own abuse with drugs, and it's just fun from the start, and there are a lot of memorable quotes from it, and that helps when reading books like these. But it doesn't get to the same point of being sincere. I don't feel like touched in the same way that I would with the other ones, so it's a bit of a trade-off. If it becomes too light-hearted, too funny, I guess, then it loses something of the emotion in it. But all memoirs can't really be tragic and negative all the time, so I do appreciate that someone writes a memoir with a bit of humor. With that said, I truly enjoy that book because of the humor and because Jeff Tweedy just seems like a really cozy person. So that would help anyone, I guess. I promise you now that I've finished with all my musical memoirs for this round, and now let's get depressed. Let's kick it all off with We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So I've read Americana earlier and truly enjoyed that one. And the reason why I chose to read this one now is that I felt like I was lagging a bit behind on my reading goals, and the audiobook was, I think, 47 minutes. I have to admit, before I read this one, I felt like, how do I say this without sounding like an idiot? I wasn't expecting to learn anything from this. Basically because it was 47 minutes, but I was so wrong. It feels very, very, very much bigger than it is. It feels like reading, let's say, 150 pages instead of probably the 40 pages that it really is. To me, the author is really good at taking the concepts and explaining them in a way I understand, and yeah, just a really, really useful book. To sum it up, I think it's easy to underestimate this small book, but I do think that that small book will have a huge impact on most people that read it. Then over to a classic, and it's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but you all know which book I'm talking about. And the funny thing is that I remember that this book is about Jane Eyre. She's a young orphaned girl, and stuff happens. And then in my notes, since I told you that I hadn't written that many notes, I've just written what a plot twist. I can barely imagine what that plot twist is, but I felt like this book was just a quite ordinary classic novel about a girl struggling, but I did enjoy it. That's my feeling. That's the feelings I have inside me now after finishing reading it. But I don't remember anything other than that. So I did enjoy it more than I have enjoyed other classics, but more than that I can't tell you. Recently I've started thinking about this because so far all the books I've read have been kind of fresh in my memory, and I've thought that, well, I'll remember everything, but apparently that won't happen. Or maybe it will happen with other books where I've extensively written a lot of notes, but time will tell. I'm afraid of forgetting books, but I'm guessing that will happen. But now a book I don't think I will forget in quite some time, and that is Abid Min Skyld. Translates to something like My Fault. And I don't currently have this because my girlfriend is reading it, and I'm very happy she does. So Abid Raja is a Norwegian politician, and I have to admit that I've always felt that he was kind of difficult to like because he's just extraordinarily extroverted, happy, and energetic at all times. And that's just not me. So I've been struggling, but I can honestly say that I will never look at that man in the same way that I've done in the past. This memoir is about his whole life, and he reads the audiobook that I listened to himself. It was magnificent. His father beats him. He's born with this disease that does so that he can't go to the toilet or regulate that himself. He is dragged off to Pakistan to get like what seems to be a medieval operation, and his parents just don't like him very much because he has this disease, and they feel like they've been punished by God. It all just seems worse and worse until someday he's Minister of State. So obviously he's a very successful person today, and I can't say anything other than that I have like a ton of admiration for him, because no one is really supposed to manage to get out of that stuff by themselves. So just an amazing story in itself. But it's also talked about in an extraordinary way. He doesn't leave anything out. So all his faults, because he has faults, you can't really come from a family like that and end up like a perfect citizen by your own. You have to work on stuff, and he just talks about how he works on stuff with us, and I can't really give enough kudos to him for doing so. So I do really recommend this. It's not translated yet, but one day I'm sure it will. Last year he was like in not a competition, but he was crowned Norway's most popular politician, and he's not at all from a big party, so that's kind of an achievement in itself. If you know his story and then you see him today, you will probably like him in some way. And then for a plot twist came this book, and that is Frihetens Øyeblikk by Abida Raja. So she's Abid Raja's sister, and I think it's translated to something like The Moment of Freedom, maybe something along those lines. This book was a secret until it came out, and for good reason, because she has also been through the same things as Abid, only in many ways worse, since she's a woman. So, sent off to Pakistan at a very, very young age to like be disciplined, I guess, for many years. Then coming back and being forced into this marriage with the man that beats her. So it's all just very, very, very depressing. This book was not as good as Abid Raja's. Mostly, I listened to this on audiobook as well, and it's read by her daughter, which is a terrible idea unless your daughter is like an actor or something. So that was a terrible thing. It's not as well written. Also, the focus isn't the same. Abid Raja, he focuses on his journey, but this is seen from the outside, just described what happens, and it's not as effectful. So the story is still gruesome in both books, but the first one is a lot better than this one, in my opinion. But it's still great that the story gets out. It's important to have these voices, and these books are great examples of this. The next book is more of an entertaining one, and I know that at least one of you have wanted me to read this. It's En Nation i Sjakk by Johan Höst. Maybe that translates to a nation in chess. If you're threatening the king in chess, what do you call that in English? I don't know. But at least the prime minister is captured, kidnapped, and the nation is supposed to play chess to set him free. And a lot of things happen. A lot of people get killed. To me, this one had two sides, one very Norwegian one and one very American one. So it sort of tried to tell the world that this novel is Norwegian, but you get all the things from American literature with it. Supposed to be like very exciting all the time. And there is one huge plot twist that I did really enjoy. So there's that. But other than that, I felt like, yeah, this is entertaining, this is okay, but don't try so hard. So it got 3 out of 5 stars. I think it's easy for me to like these kinds of novels, so that's not the biggest achievement, but it was entertaining. That book was also immensely popular in this country, so a lot of Norwegians have read it. If that means anything to you at all. Then over to a novel, not a memoir by a musician, but a novel from a musician, and it's Fiskehuset by Stein Torleif Bjella. I think it translates to The Fishing House, something along those lines. It's about a younger man and an older man going for a fishing trip up in the mountains, where I think it sets out to just have this feeling of calmness, being in touch with nature, being close to the simpler things, talking about generational stuff, all those kinds of things. I did enjoy it, but it doesn't have a lot to it. A simplistic novel about 2 men in the forest, which can be cozy to read about, I guess. As I said, I'm trying to get through this quickly, and I don't really have that much more to say about this one. Then over to a huge surprise, because I've read this author before, did not like her that much, but then ended up loving these 3 next books. So the author is Helga Flatland, and for the titles I have to go down to my computer and read. The first one is called Go If You Have To, Stay If You Can. The second one is called Everyone Wants Home, No One Wants Back. And the third one is called There Is No Hole. These novels are about 3 young men. They travel to Afghanistan to fight the war, and they're all killed. So the 3 novels is basically about the people left behind, the thoughts of the soldier themselves, and then people in their community and around them, and how they tackle grief. And it's just so good. I was completely surprised by this. The first novel was very good. The second one I absolutely loved, and the third one I also just loved. So I've never been more surprised, I guess, just because I read one book from this author before and I thought that was kind of boring. It seems like the thing she does is talk about people and the bond between them, and I think that the difference between these books and the other one is the setup for it all and how big it could all be. So there's a lot of things to write about. It's not like the small emotions, it's the big stuff and the big hurt, I guess. So that's what makes these great, I guess. Absolutely recommend them. They don't seem to be translated to English yet, so that's a shame. But there are a lot of other countries that can read them and enjoy them. I'm sorry. But the books my English-speaking friends can read are the books in the series Rivers of London by Ben Arnovich, and this is book number 3. So this has been standing here for quite some time. I felt like I really wanted to read fantasy again. I get that feeling when autumn comes. It seems like every autumn, I just want to escape, I guess. That seems reasonable. But anyway, I read this, I liked it. It's still about our detective Peter Grant going around talking to people that might be other creatures than just regular people and solving a murder. So I think it's a fun setup, and it's just entertaining. So with the Johan Hust book as well, entertaining. And I do like being entertained. Reading this, I'm constantly reminded that I enjoy the setup with him being a constable in London, but then having a lot of these supernatural elements to it. At the same time, as I hate magical realism, maybe things are moving in my head, maybe I'm going somewhere else, maybe I'm a bit less prejudiced, I don't know. We'll see how this goes, but I still enjoy reading this series. We'll probably read book number 4. The next book I read was a book by Are Kalve called The Bible 2. So this is about Jesus arriving at a conference center near Oslo here and how he deals with being around people in the 20th century, I guess. It was really short, funny and entertaining, but I do feel that you have to be quite Norwegian to get the full use out of it, because he spends a lot of time using Norwegian references that you really should be familiar with to enjoy it to the fullest. Are Kalve is a humorist or comedian, or I don't know what to call it, because he isn't your average comedian. He seems like a wiser comedian, like the person who reads a lot of newspapers, I guess. So the Bible 1 I don't know about, but the Bible 2 was just short and funny, so I enjoyed it. The last book in this wrap-up is Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie, so the book about Peter Pan, or first book about Peter Pan. I don't know if that was a series, but at least that's what I read. And to be a book that I thought of as a book for children, it's really grotesque at times. Really a tough read. There were moments where I thought, well, this is kind of sad, and that surprised me a bit. Also, I struggled to get into the rhythm of it. I felt like it didn't quite get me into the spaces that it should have. So when they go off to Neverland and explore that place, I felt like I couldn't really place things or understand where they were going, what was really happening, and also I felt like they were jumping a bit. So my mind was confused and a bit disturbed while reading this. So I ended up not enjoying it that much. I do enjoy having read it, because now I can talk to other people that have read it and say, like, what really happened there? Isn't this a bit too much? I don't feel like I'm a very sensitive person when it comes to things like this, but when reading this I felt a bit overwhelmed at times. Of course I read that one because it was free and I downloaded it to my Kindle. Now let's just see if I can keep up reading on my Kindle when I travel. It's really convenient, and for summer next year I'm really going to go through the process of just reading on my Kindle. But that also means that if I can't find enough affordable books, I'll read classics, and then I'll lose my patience at some point. I forgot to mention that when you watch this video, or at least when it's published, I'll be in Dublin hopefully, and this will be the first time. So if you have recommendations for things to see, book related or non-book related, I love going around looking at ruins, old rocks and stuff with an interesting history. So just leave a comment to this video or send me a message. That would be great. I'm looking very much forward to it. I think we're back in business. It was lovely to see you all again, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!